It's Friday. It's 8 p.m. You know what time it is. Evening, boys.
Oh, so far so good.
That was all right, that wasn't it? Wasn't bad.
It was, yeah, very professional.
Wasn't bad at all.
You're better than Daz, to be fair.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, well, to all the viewers watching at home, you will probably notice or realise if you're a regular viewer that this is my first show of Running the Buttons, so I'm a little bit nervous, so you'll have to bear with me. But as always, I'm joined by my co-hosts Martin and Pete. So, evening, boys.
How are we?
And as you will all know, we've got a very, very special guest this evening. See, press the wrong button. There you go. We are joined by our very special guest, George. So I'm going to introduce George now. Evening, George.
Evening, chaps.
Evening, mate.
How you doing, mate? You okay?
Good, thanks. Good. Happy and thrilled to be on.
Yeah, do you know what, mate? We're absolutely delighted to have you on, and thank you very much for agreeing to come on. It's funny, isn't it? We've been dying to get you on for the past few weeks, and for one reason or another, we've not been able to do it. And then we agreed this date, and we were all like, "Yep, fantastic, that's wonderful." And then the last 24 hours has just been absolutely mental. So we've been really looking forward to having you on, mate. But before we get into anything like that, first of all, I just want to ask you, Newcastle. How come you're a Newcastle fan? What's your background?
So, well, as you can probably tell by accent, I was born in and around the area. Grew up sort of halfway between Newcastle and Sunderland. So it was a 50-50 split where I grew up. And Newcastle, largely down to one of my older cousins. His dad and brother both supported Sunderland, funnily enough. And he was the rogue. And from being about 5, 6, sort of just absolutely fell in love. This was back in the day when we were on the telly and we would have semi-regular derbies with Sunderland, so it was always a bit of a family aggro, bit of rhythm, bit of winding each other up, and it just grew from there. Really, obviously, school, teenage. I had the privilege of sort of my early teens being Keegan and watching some really free-flowing attacking football. But well, from Keegan coming in when he took over when we were bottom of the old second division, I sort of remember back to that and the young bloods breaking into the team. So. And it just goes with you. It just sticks. And I moved to the Midlands. I was in the Midlands for about 10 years, so I only got to go to away games, and that you just get more of a sort of passion for it as you get older, and you realise you have to go to an away game by yourself type of thing. So
yeah.
But coming back to the Northeast in the last few years and got my season ticked back and just buzzing. Obviously buzzing as best I can be with the takeover talk. Not much.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's really nice, mate. It's nice that you've been able to go back to your roots, back to the Northeast. So that's fantastic. Well, what I'll do, George, I'll ease you in gently, mate. So the reason that we've asked George to come on this evening, as I'm sure many of you watching will know, is because George created a thread. Am I right in saying, George, it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago? Is that about right, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, and George created a thread, and it was basically to kind of explain to the average Joe, like myself, Pete, Martin, and other people watching, to kind of explain where we were in terms of the takeover. Now, when I saw, and Martin and Pete saw George's thread, it was just really interesting, and it was something that, helped us understand kind of where we were, because a lot of, this takeover talk, you can get lost with all the legal jargon, and the way that George broke it down was absolutely fantastic. And as I say, George, it's a real pleasure for us to have you on this evening. But for anyone at home, we're not an in the know channel, as you know, and George won't mind me saying this, George is not in the know either, but George will be able to explain the situation to us, and that's why we've got George on this evening, hopefully, to give us all a little bit of clarity on what's been happening over the last 24 hours. So George, let's start. I've just clicked that on the screen there, mate. So let's start with the Premier League failing in the bid to get the Newcastle takeover cat case thrown out. But obviously, it does mean that there is more delays. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, mate? Or if you want to start in a different order, please feel free to do that as well.
No, happy to go with what the order that we're going to run in, to be fair. And so this is one of the dangers of absolutely not being in the know and sort of putting things down for my own benefit as well as anybody else's. But I think, and I made it clear in the threads, that I try to sort of ground everything that I said in fact. And that news article that you've just had on the screen there about the cat case, there's no actual information out there other than what's been reported. And I tend to take that with a pinch of salt all the time, because journalists are told, or they understand, that it's been thrown out. So I've read a couple of the articles on it. Obviously, the Tribunal website hasn't been updated. I know earlier this week there was some talk around it was going to start on Monday coming, because but I mean, I'd already done some work on reference numbers. I mean, you see people on Twitter saying they've rang the Tribunal headquarters to understand what the process is, and that's one of the things that really irks me when people do purport things to be fact when they're not. I'd rather just say I don't know, and the reality is I don't know. So I try to find out. So on that, the fact that it talks about how the cat case hasn't been thrown out, but the Premier League are trying to keep it confidential, kind of resonates with the Tribunal proceedings. So if anybody who doesn't know, there's two documents on the Competition Appeals Tribunal's website. There's their guide to proceedings and there's their rules, and both of them have provision within there for elements of it to be confidential. Now, again, this is where my legal knowledge fails me, and I understand what confidentiality is. I understand what a confidentiality ring is, but I haven't been able to go through in sufficient detail and understand all of the paragraphs, because the paragraphs will point to another paragraph in another document or further in the actual rules themselves. And these are big documents. They're not small, sort of. I mean, one of them's 68 pages and one of them's 145 pages, to give you a sense of what it's setting out. And they quite often you need to read 5 or 6 different paragraphs in 5 or 6 different areas to fully comprehend what that means. And as of tonight, my inference is that by doing that, by if we take the article as true and the Premier League have failed and the CAT have jurisdiction, then it will require an additional hearing to agree elements of that confidentiality. So it goes back to the point that you've just made there, that there will be further delay.
Yeah. That's obviously a concern, isn't it? We've kind of waited long enough, and for us to hear that there could potentially be even more delays is obviously a little bit worrying, isn't it? It's not something that we.
Delay on the CAT, though, not the arbitration. So they're two discretely separate things, and the arbitration is the key one for me. So the CAT was almost, and I tried to tease that out in the thread. We've got two parallel legal actions running: the arbitration, which is on separation and proving that MBS isn't the be all and end all, and that's an interesting conversation in itself. And then the CAT, which is about breach of competition. And my understanding of the Premier League's argument to have the CAT jurisdiction ruled out was that the arbitration was going to cover the same legal arguments, but I never bought that as being any value. And if you listen to Keith and others who've sort of been involved and had some experience in this, and you glean from what they're saying in terms of the disclosure would have an impact, clearly those things would, but the timing never necessarily lined up for me in terms of the disclosure would never have really happened, given when the club started the CAT versus when they started arbitration. So it was unlikely that the disclosure from the Competition Appeals Tribunal would ever have had an impact on the arbitration. And I think they've kept it discreetly separately so Mike can have his cake and eat. And I've maintained that from the sort of beginning. I think if we win the arbitration, then and the takeover is clear to go through, Mike's going to hammer them for as much money as he can get. That's what that's there for. And if we lose arbitration, Mike's going to try and hammer them a different way for his compensation and get a second bite at the takeover because there's an injunction in there.
Right. No, I see what you mean. I'm very conscious as well, by the way, Pete and Mart. You know, is there anything that you want to ask George on that? Do you want to jump in there and just go into any more detail?
I think for me, it's just it's just really the understanding of it. I think I don't think at any point on any format of case, I don't think the Premier League are going to want anything to come out publicly, because I think from what I've read and what I've gleaned and what I understand, there definitely seems to be this tactic of delay and trying to get bits thrown out. So if I look at the statement that was released last night, and I've seen some people going, well, Ashley doesn't give crap about the club, this, that, and the other, blah 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 blah. But he's also not a stupid businessman. He's very astute. He might be what he is. He doesn't get the top of the stadium cleaned. He doesn't give a bollocks about putting money into the club. I get all of that, but he's not stupid either. So from a perspective of the statement that came out last night, I think whilst a lot of people might be slightly divided as the motives, in my opinion, there's no way that would have been released without the agreement of the buyers, the sellers, his lawyers, and everybody else. So to me, there's initially when we had Liam Kennedy on there a couple of weeks back, and we were part of the Matters group when it all started to kick off and everything else. I think it's always been planned from Ashley to have this two-pronged attack of how to get it, because if I don't get it that way, I'm going to get it this way, and if I go this way and I don't get it that way, they're going to have to go public, and they're not going to want to go public. So I think the statement last night really is just another. Does it do anything to the arbitration or to the cap? No, it doesn't. But what it does is it sends a very clear message. The likes of trying to have the chairman of the arbitration panel struck off. He didn't win that. The club didn't win that. But what it does is it did clearly show that Mike and the club have made it very clear that they've had an issue with that. So if there's not fairness shown from the panel throughout that, it gives them a leeway then to challenge that again in an appeal and go, well, we did tell you that this guy at the top used to work for the Premier League and everything else. So I think they're very, very clever. And I think, we can be as divided as we want to be, but I think the Premier League's tactics for me have appeared to show, and again, I don't know, but would appear to me as an outsider looking in that they've got something to hide. And I've always been a firm believer of many, many businesses, whatever's happening and going on, even in a workplace, like, I'm a manager in a workplace, I deal with certain things, I might deal with a supervisor or whatever. I don't necessarily talk about somebody else about it because you don't air your dirty washing in public. So for me, the statements, I think it was perfectly timed. Premier League are under pressure. He's got the cat going one way. He's got arbitration going the other way. He's got a hugely successful legal team. The big guns are out. I think they're very clever at what they're doing, and I think at some stage, he'll get what he wants and what we want and everything else. But I think you could get very, very wrapped up in it, and it is because as a fan base, we're quite an emotional bunch of people. The smallest thing can set that off and set that divide. And I think, even in listening to you just explaining that first bit, George, to me, I think throughout all of it, you've got to take some with a pinch of salt. But I think what you have to do with all this is keep a very calm head and let, I suppose the very easy thing to say would be that at the end of the day, us on this show, you doing a thread, Steve and the guys on the Amigos, Lee Charnley, whoever else, nobody is going to sort this out other than the legals that are working on this with the Premier League. And that's it. Dead simple. We can't affect it. We can't change it. We can't do anything. So lay back, let it run, and let's see what comes. Either way, in a couple of months, we're going to know either way. So let that run. But yeah, interesting. And go on, Pete. Sorry, you probably had something there. Go on.
No, look. I'm going to reserve sort of. I've got an opinion on the cat case, but I think it's probably better to get into the arbitration first, because as we've already said, the arbitration, and a few have said on the chat as well, the arbitration is the key. I think it was Dunno that mentioned it. Arbitration, the one for us personally as Newcastle United fans, is the arbitration, because the arbitration, if we win that, and it looks like we've got a great chance of doing it, that opens up the opportunity of a takeover. And let's face it, with all the bullshit and all the smoke screens and everything that's been put out on social media, that's the one that the fans care about the most, because all we want is a takeover. We want new owners at this club that are going to be ambitious, that are going to take us forward. So for me, that's the one that's the key. I have my opinion on the cat, and I'll mention that probably a little bit later in the show. But for now, I think the arbitration's the one, and that's the one that's going to be starting like ASAP. We don't know a date, but that's the one that's going to be starting any time. It could be starting as early as Monday. We don't know, but that's the one that's going to make the difference. So, Chris, I don't know whether you want to sink our teeth into this one and see what our opinions all are, not just George, but everybody is saying about this, because I've got some opinions on this, and I'd love to hear George's opinions on the arbitration and how it's sort of snowballed, over the recent 6 to 8 weeks, how it sort of snowballed into what we're seeing right now. Yeah.
Well, tell you what, I think you're absolutely right, Pete. Let's kind of draw the line under the cat. The only thing I wanted to ask you, George, and this is a comment from Matthew Smith. Now, obviously, I appreciate you don't know the answer, and I'm not expecting a definitive answer from you. But Matthew Smith wrote here, George, if the cat case has been approved and the Premier League fail in getting it thrown out, how long would you expect the further delays to be? Now, obviously, I know how long is a piece of string, but in your opinion, and this is all about opinions, what would you say, George?
So I think when I wrote that thread, I think I said an expedited cat case wouldn't be heard until about November-ish, if you sort of look through the rules. And having scanned the rules and the proceedings today, for an additional hearing, you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks on top of that. So you'd be, December, January-ish? And that's if it sequences and there aren't additional delays in that. I'd say, Christopher G putting up there, deals in fact, tries to deal in fact. A lot of opinion and supposition in there as well, but yeah, so I reckon 6 to 8 weeks minimum additional on the cat.
Yeah, just to put in there, sorry, George and Chris,
no, go on, mate.
I have to emphasize, Chris, you said it perfectly at the beginning of the show, and I think it needs to be reiterated again that we are not in the know here. We are just four guys shooting the breeze, chewing the fat about our club and the possible takeover. Nobody's saying that we're lawyers or we're in the know. We're not. None of us are. Even on the chat, none of us are. And we're just giving our own opinions on what we feel is where we're at with regards to this takeover. So I just have to reiterate that again, just to make that point. Everyone's points are valid. Whether it's for and against. I'm not, kind of trying to cut people down with regards to that. But we're just here having a chat and an opinion. Yeah. Love the questions on the chat, but great. George's opinions are his own.
Yeah, I think the thing to remember, Pete, because we will, like anything, George going, it could be a 6 to 8 week minimum. There will be people that don't agree with that. There'll be somebody else that thinks it could be this, and that's fine, and that's great. And Twitter is great for that kind of stuff. But for me, what this evening is about for me, and I suppose the joy of having George in, is I want to know a bit more about arbitration, how that kind of works, in layman's terms. That for a thick fella like me that doesn't have the invested time because I've got 3 kids, I don't, as much as I be on and off Twitter, I want to listen to George break it down in fairly basic terms as to how does that all work? What happens? What are the kind of expectations in his view as to how things may or may not proceed? And then, somewhere before we close off this evening, whether it may or may not happen, I'd love just to get a feel from George of where he thinks it's going to go. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And that doesn't mean, as Pete and Chris have said, that doesn't mean we know a thing. I know feck all, nothing, right? I know how to order a Chinese and open a can of beer. That's about all I know, right? But it's interesting. I think it's just interesting for people to hear it in the basics, and that's all tonight's about. So, George, arbitration, as Chris alluded to, break it down especially for Chris, because he lives in Liverpool. Man, he's thicker than I am. Right, break it down for us guys as to how does that get started? What kind of position is it at now in your view? Where's it headed? What happens? And what would be the expectations, and where do you think it's at?
So before I go into what will ultimately be a verbal tirade, which you'll have to check as lads, because I'll talk for England.
No, that's fine.
But just to emphasise that,
go for it.
This is just guessing from what's out there in the rules, and then sort of dare use a Liam join the dots style phrase, because a lot of it is just looking at different documents. But so from the start, arbitration starts from the form in the Premier League handbook. So the club have to complete the form. Now, if you go back to last year, when it was reported that around June time, that was when the Premier League made the provisional determination. And I can't paraphrasing a lot of it, a provisional decision or determination that KSA was a director under English law. They apparently offered arbitration to PIF. Now, the Premier League handbook doesn't say that you can offer arbitration to a third party, the party who's buying the club. The handbook infers everything goes through the club because the club are the member. So my understanding of the rules is that it's club who has to commence the arbitration proceedings by filling out a form. And that form's in the Premier League handbook. You can go and have a look at it. And it's literally, I want to start arbitration proceedings. I can fill it in. It's literally, my club, I want to start arbitration proceedings on this issue. And we know that happened at around September. So that's been confirmed in various reports and various judgments. So that's when the arbitration started officially in September 20. Then we've got all of the information that we know that around the tribunal arbiters being appointed. So again, the handbook sets out that process and what's got to happen. So the club propose an arbiter, the Premier League propose an arbiter, and then the two of them choose a third party. And I think it's really important to say at this point, that's why I've got faith in the process, because it's not like the Premier League are saying, this person is going to arbitrate. This panel that we choose that you have no influence over. So it is independent, and these people who make up that panel are people with significant legal experience, and that's part of the requirement that's set out in the handbook. So again, that's all really clear. We know that. Oh, we know by what's been reported both in the media, in the judgments, and in the FOI request that the Chronicle made, were that the club tried to get the chair removed, because after the chair had been appointed, Bird and Bird wrote to the club solicitors and said, it's probably worth noting that we've used this chair before in a number of proceedings. He's also given advice to the Premier League. So that resulted in the court hearing judgments that were issued sort of February, March-ish time. And that was the delay. So the reason the hearing didn't start was because we were appealing the chair. And when you look at that and you look at the outcomes of that, we tried to do two things in my mind. We tried to appeal against the chair because of the fact there was a potential conflict of interest in terms of the advice that he'd given the Premier League. So he'd given advice on, and I might get this wrong because I'm doing it from memory. So as I understand it, he gave advice on Section F, which is the owners and directors tests. And the arbitration is on Section A, which is about who we are choosing to test. i.e., does it warrant MBS being tested? And the club argued that you couldn't separate the two because the terminology used, so person, director, has in Section A has an impact on the owners and directors tests, and the two were sort of interlinked, which is a reasonable assertion, I think. The other thing we tried to do in that was to bring it into public and to ask for the arbitration hearing to be made public. So we lost on the chair being removed because the judge wasn't convinced that our argument was strong enough and that a reasonable man on the street would infer that the handful of times the chair had been used, that he would be sufficiently... there's no way he wouldn't be impartial, ultimately, is what it came out with. And I felt that was wholly reasonable. So again, these are people who've been in their legal profession where the standards are very high for a very long time, all three of them. The other bit about not being brought into public, well, the arbitration was never going to be played out in public, never, ever, ever. However, the judge sort of made some, he released some information that wasn't already in the public domain. So it was things like that the hearing was going to take place in July. There was things like, I can't remember, but it gave us some more information, which was a good starting place. And that got us to sort of February, March-ish time. And now we've been working towards the hearing. So 3 months from then, we know because it was published that the hearing was in July. I think there was some assumptions on Twitter, and I think it was because of Sky Sports reporter on Twitter saying that it started at the end of June, and a few people pointed out the last week in June is also the first week in July. So I think there's a lot of inferences drawn and people being told, I know that it's starting then, I know it's starting here, but we know it starts in July. And the hearing's the end game. So going all the way back to September and when the chair was appointed, there's a whole set of processes which need to be required. So what happens is there's some kind of initial conference between the parties involved. They then set specific deadlines for hearings. Now, all of that should have been done, but then we appealed the chair. So once that concluded, sort of February, March, that had to be done again. So all it's done is extend it. And you could argue that the club did that and it was pointless. I'd say it feels tactical to me. And I think that's reinforced by the statement yesterday. And I've got a whole thread ready to tell you about tonight on that if you want, if we get time. But the hearing is the end point. So the hearing is, they've already presented the evidence. So the evidence has been given to the tribunal. And the hearing's about really getting into the detail of that. So if the club are saying, right, you Premier League said that you wanted to test KSA, we'd already given you this information. You told us there was no issues. There's got to be a backwards and forwards. Now, we can only draw inferences from what's being said. And I mean, everybody's heard rumours that KSA flew a plane over and dropped stuff off at the Premier League headquarters and things like that. And I think the fact of the matter will be that the hearing will take both sides of the argument and they will understand if the decision was lawful. And that's an important word. And it comes out in the statement, because unlawful means it's not allowed within the rules, which is different to illegal. There's a nuance, but it's different, because illegal means it's strictly prohibited by the rules, but unlawful just means it's not within the rules, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, mate.
So we're at the end game. I was saying, it was a long way of saying we're in the end game.
Yeah, but that's really good to hear. And do you know what, Mike Gent asked a really interesting question here. And again, I know it is. It's very hard to say. I understand that, but Mike's asked, if we win arbitration, will the takeover go through? So obviously that's the $1 million question, isn't it? But also, will it mean we have to start the owners and directors test again? Now, there's been a lot of things have been said, whether the owners and directors test took place, whether it didn't. Again, I know it's just your opinion, George, but in your opinion, or what you believe or what you think and what you've seen, how would you best answer that question?
So, yes, that's how it best answer. I absolutely believe it will happen. I think in terms of the owner's address test starting again, I think Chris is right. We don't know if it did start because there's conflicting information in the public domain. So my understanding is the Premier League have said repeatedly that it never started because that's not the process. The process is you determine who is to be tested and then you carry out the tests. It seems that the consortium are inferring that the test began and there was no red flag. And then there was the Chronicles FOI that said it in the correspondence between the Department of Culture, Media and Sport and the Premier League, they said that the test had started. So that's a really difficult part of it to answer. Would those tests be required? I would suspect not, because they've probably already been done, or it's just a TikTok exercise now. Because the reality is that it's the separation point, which is the delay. So in my mind, we win that, and everything else goes through pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You know what? Just to add to that, I mean, obviously we were all kind of on tenterhooks around sort of this time last year, or even earlier than this, sort of April, May. We were sort of already in party mode, thinking, right, it's just a formality, the owners and directors test. I don't know about you guys, but I was waking up at 6 o'clock every morning, like clicking on Twitter, hoping for an announcement that it was going to be made. And it was like the only way we were kind of getting through lockdown at that point is by the hope of we were going to be potentially the richest club in the world. But going back to my point, I was really interested because throughout that stage, we were told on more than one occasion that we were in the owners and directors test. And in fact, there were people within the owners and directors test, people within the PIF that had already been sort of interviewed and spoken to and had given evidence with regards to the owners and directors test. So it's really confusing in terms of where we're at. So it was interesting to get your points, George, because we were told, Luke Edwards has said the same. George Culkin had said the same on more than one occasion. There were other journalists that had mentioned it, that we were in the owners and directors test, to then be told that actually we weren't at any point. So it's hard to believe where we're actually at right at this stage right now. So it could be as quick as anything because we've already been through it, the majority of the people that are going to be sort of part of the ownership of the club, or it could be a little bit longer. But you would like to think that the fact that we've waited a year, that they would try and sort of fast track it through.
So, I mean, if it was me and I was representing the club in arbitration and it looks like you'd win, I'd be appealing to the sensibility of the tribunal to say, well, the consortium's already been through that. So we know that Amanda Staveley, her husband, the Rubens, and I think it was the PIF's chair or finance director.
Yeah, Al Rumerman, I think, had already gone through and had been approved. Was what I had.
And that's my understanding. But my understanding was that whilst they would be a director under the rules, they wouldn't have a board member status. So the board would be made up of others. So it would generally be Amanda and the Rubens, and that was, I think, reported in the media from the 200 or 300 page dossier that they'd submitted as their evidence. So I think you're right, it is really difficult. But I'd be saying, if we've already done this work, why do we need to do it again? But that's just me, and I don't know all of the legalities that sit around it.
Yeah, okay. Chris, I'm just going to jump in because I know you are on the buttons, but you're looking at everything. But we have got a goal, as Mike put up there. Italy have taken the lead against Belgium, 31 minutes. Nicolo Barella with the goal for Italy. In the other game, just as an update, Spain went through on penalties after Switzerland missed 3 of their penalties between saves. And unfortunately for Newcastle, Fabian Schär missed his penalty, as did a few others. So Spain did go through 3-1 on penalties with Arrazabal, Marino, and Olmo, who scored for Spain and took them through 3-1. So Italy won up, and Spain already through to a semi-final.
Italy are looking good, by the way.
Yeah.
They are progressing very, very well.
They called Italy at the start of the tournament, lads, if you remember.
You know what, Martin? I don't remember that. But no,
the show back. So I've a question then, George. So they've gone through the testing, and again, reading the press and everything else. At a point, and Liam has said this on the show with Steve Wraith and a few others, everything was flying. ODT was underway. Everything was good. The terminology, no red flags, was out there. It was all good. Then everything came to a halt. Something changed. The red, we then got red flags. I have a view on what may or may not have happened, right? In your opinion, right? And again, I'm not trying to leave this in as a question, but what changed? In your view, what changed? How were we at a point, and then all of a sudden, was it the introduction of Hoffman into the Premier League? Was there outside influence? Was there, what happened? Where did it go wrong?
So I think it's a combination of both, being honest. Hoffman coming in at the time he did is clearly significant in terms of that. So I did, sadly, a little timeline of events, and you see when everything's purported to be in the no red flags all happening before Hoffman came in, and then all of a sudden there was these sort of delays and the periods where it went a little bit quiet, and everyone was saying, well, we've been told no red flags, but it's taken a little bit longer than we anticipated because there's nothing really happening. And then obviously lots of other things started coming out. And I think the fact that Hoffman's got connections with Barclays probably quite an interesting one. And then the relationship that BN have had, and BN writing to the member clubs as well as releasing a statement, and then amnesty and all of those types of things added pressure to it. And I think part of that, and looking at the responses to that, I mean, in my mind, the Premier League should have done what they're doing now and really been saying no comment, because they shouldn't have been saying we'll take this into account during what is a commercial sale of a club. But again, that's just my view on it. But I definitely think Hoffman coming in had something to do with it.
From a point then of, if you again, just purely your opinion, from a point then of the likes of being lobbying the other clubs, from a point of the ODT test, then is that something that's acceptable or not acceptable in your view? I would have thought it's not acceptable. So it's just something that's meant to be a private matter, I would have thought.
As a general principle, it's absolutely not, but it's not even applicable in the owners and directors test. So that, I suppose the point in the owners and directors test that this sort of all gets wrapped up on is piracy, and basically the way the tests are designed in simple terms is, if you've got no money or you have committed a crime, you're not fit to be the owner of a football club. Now, these are multi-billionaires, and you could argue might actually is not fit to own a football club, but the tests don't provide for that because he's got plenty of money and he's never been convicted of a crime in the UK or abroad. So the only sorry, I've just seen that my son's logged in on YouTube and said hi, Dad. Yeah, throwing us off his stride. So the way the tests are set out, they're not fit for purpose in that respect. And the only way the Premier League could hook a failure is by demonstrating that piracy, the crime, had been committed. And the only way to do that was to link it back to KSA. And I mean, to a certain extent, even that's a stretch, because in the court documents that I've seen, the World Trade Organization, they were never convicted, they were accused, and they didn't really help themselves in terms of they wouldn't help the Premier League or other organisations to prevent piracy from happening. So the fact that BN did that lobbying, it feels as if it was directed at the Premier League. If I'm being perfectly honest, I mean, obviously there's a sort of nudge to the other clubs that this could impact the money and income that you get, which is never good, and that's why it's going to the cat. But from a relationship perspective, it was, for me, it was very much being telling the Premier League, look, if you do this, we're going to be royally pissed off, and it's going to have an impact on what the business we do with you going forward.
Okay.
We've got loads of comments coming in on the chat, lads. So I wanna try and pop a few questions on there. Now there is one particular question which I wanted to put up, and it's a really important question. And I'm glad that Daz has asked it. Pete will know all about this as well. So Daz has asked, what day is it? And I'm just going to confirm that now.
It's Friday then. It's Saturday, Sunday. Woo!
That's for you, Daz.
So yeah, off you.
George, I've got to be honest. You're probably thinking, what awful singing's that? And what's going on with that video? Me and Pete, was it a couple of weeks ago, Pete? We got really excited, didn't we? And we thought Takeover's happening. Then me and Pete actually had the date booked off, and we were going to, get it well. Pete's on the brandy. I'd be on anything. So yeah, and unfortunately, it didn't quite happen like that. But no, in all seriousness, we've been having some really interesting comments coming in, and what I want to move on to now, because obviously it was more breaking news that's happened in the last 24 hours, and that's this, which is the announcement that Newcastle have signed a deal with Castore, who are our new kit manufacturers, and we've had a really interesting comment actually from our friend John Justice Allen. And he's wrote, with Castore taking control of the club website, this is a huge indication of Ashley's mindset. Who could ever imagine him changing it from Sports Direct? He's posted the keys through the letterbox in his mind. And that's something that we've been saying over the last couple of weeks, isn't it, lads? When we were talking about transfers and we were saying, people are linking us to X, Y, and Z, and we were going, Ashley, really, he's not physically there, is he? Like he's kind of done with the club as far as he's concerned. He's sold the club. I mean, George, what did you think about the Castore deal being announced? I know they've probably had it on ice for quite some time, and you can tell that when they've released images, and they've confirmed that you can see the players training in it. And for example, Miggy. And we know Miggy's away at the moment, so obviously that's been there for some time. But what do you think of the significance of the deal with Castore being announced so soon?
So I think it had to be because the deal with Puma had gone, so that you can't have a sort of no kit manufacturer. If you look at the taglines, they're very interesting. And you can draw some inferences from those taglines. New, better start. And it felt to me like that there was an expectation from them that we would have been under new ownership, because that's the messaging from what I can tell. And I think it's very interesting that we haven't seen anything yet, especially in an age where kits are leaked regularly. I know we've seen lots of concept kits and we've heard lots of things. I mean, Chronicle did a lovely mock-up of a Grandad collar, but we've got no sense of the type of. I mean, we know Castore from what they did up at Rangers and the quality of the stuff that they produce and the type of stuff that they produce, but we don't even know if it's going to be Fun 88 on the logo or on the sponsorship. So I think it had to. They couldn't have delayed it any further, but I've probably drawn too many inferences from some of the taglines that they had.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to just seeing the kit. Like it's great. To be fair to Gallagher Shots, they put a picture up on Twitter earlier today. 10 years of Puma. Going back and looking at some of the kits. And when you actually see them all together, you look at them, you go, oh, Jesus Christ, they were woeful, some of them. So I'm glad to see the back of Puma, to be honest. I'm looking forward to seeing what Castore bring out. If it is the reverting back to the granddad collar and stuff, then happy days. Obviously, we've seen some, as you say, concept jerseys. We've seen the home one there leaked the other week, not too much whited and stuff like that. So I think certainly from what the two lads from Castore did with Rangers, and I think what they'll do, I'd like to think that they know us as a club. They're clued up fellas in a really good business. And I'd like to think that, they've looked at the tradition of the club and listened to some of the stuff that the fans have said about jerseys and shirts over recent weeks, months and years. So I think we'll get good shirts. I think they'll be good quality. The one particular moan I've always had, which I mentioned on the other night show, was I just hope that the badge is embroidered and it's not one of these sticky plastic yokes that goes on. I think, a shirt with an embroidered badge is it's better quality. It just looks much better.
Mark, can I just jump in 1 sec, mate?
Yeah.
There's been a goal. As we know, it's now 2-0 to Italy. Thank you, Chris, for that update on that.
Yeah, and I think Belgium have a penalty as well.
They do, and I'm live, and it's Lukaku, and he's buried it. It's 2-1.
Buried it 2-1.
2-1.
Game on.
Game on. Game on.
Can I ask a question on that? Just with what you said there about the badge being embroidered, there's a fair few rumours flying about what badge it's going to be.
Whether they're going to do a new one.
Well, so whether they're going to use which size is that one? So like an older version of the club badge, because I'd heard that Ashley owns the rights to the current badge and leases it back to the club. Hence why they were going to do it. But I don't know if any of you have an opinion on that.
I'd love to go back to the badge back from the early 80s off the Bukta shirts. I like the magpie in front of the castle. That would be my favourite badge, probably along with the one that's on your shirt there, George. So they will be my two favourites. So I'd love to go a bit more retro, and go a bit classic and stuff. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I know people go, if it hasn't got this, I'm not buying it. If it hasn't got that, lads, cop on. We're all going to buy them. We always do. The only thing I don't do because I'm not 16 anymore is I don't get a name on the back no more. But other than that, I'll still buy. And like Pete, I'm sure we'll buy all three. In different stages. If they're not so great, then look, it'll be DHgate or some other foreign supplier that we will trend with. But yeah, Christopher, will we give a quick shout out to the sponsors?
Yeah,
lad?
I was just about to say, mate. Yeah. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody for watching. And please press the like and comment button. We love getting all your comments in, and more importantly as well at the end there, if you can subscribe as well, that'd be fantastic. So don't forget to like, obviously keep commenting and subscribe. That would be really helpful. It'd be really great for the channel. And also I just wanted to give a big shout out to our friend Bruce, and he said George then, our friend Bruce. And as we always say, Bruce in. Bruce is based in Newcastle Central Station, and he sells a host of craft beers. And I've been told how lovely they are. And I'm going up to Newcastle myself in September, so I'm looking forward to visiting Bruce at Centre Ale and going to try his beers. But yeah, if there's anybody close to Newcastle, and get yourself down to Central Station and have a sample of Bruce's beers. I've got George on the brain. So excited to have you on, George. I've just got your name stuck in my head. But no, so yeah, that's Bruce sorted. We want Bruce in.
Thanks for the support as always.
Yeah, absolutely. So boys, what should we move on to now? What would you say? What have we not covered, or what else would we like to ask George? Before we start thinking about wrapping up. Or George, have you got any questions for us?
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to ask us, or anything you wanted to discuss, or tell us more about?
We probably haven't got enough time to. I did do a bit of a breakdown of the statement, so I'll whack a thread up tonight, tomorrow.
Yeah, give us a brief synopsis if you can. If that's probably about the biggest word I've used today. So
that's the biggest word you've ever used.
I think there's quite a few bits in it, like, to be fair. So
okay.
The fact that there's a direct reference to PIF is positive, because I think it knocks back some of the doubt, the continuing and ongoing doubt. I think it's putting the onus directly on the Premier League to make a decision as to whether or not they will agree to the arbitration being played out in public. Now, I'm not expecting that the Premier League will, but it's a bold move. It makes reference to the influence of partners, and it makes specific reference to the breakaway, the ESL. So I think it's almost like they're sat there with a royal flush and they are tipping their hand to say, we know we're going to win this. You know we're going to win this. And we're going to make it difficult for you. That's how I read it. They also do a couple of ways, because I've been doing, I've sort of pulled sentences and drawn around. They talk about public interest sort of halfway through it, and again at the bottom, and government interest, and sort of it's almost a little shot at them to say, look, if this goes wrong, then it's gonna play out in public. And gone are the days where these kinds of decisions can and will be kept in secret. And I think we're probably going to see some of that through the football reform as well. They say quite clearly the club have got nothing to hide. Now, it's interesting because they say the club have got nothing to hide with regard to arbitration. And that just makes me automatically think, well, what have the club got to hide other than arbitration? But that's just me being a little bit cynical, I think. It makes a real distinction between unlawful decision. And again, it's reinforced throughout. And going back to, I think, what I said in the thread as well, the CAT and the arbitration are both civil proceedings. So you've got to remember, in civil, there's no criminal convictions, because there's a different forum for that, and there's different burden of proof. So the burden of proof for a criminal conviction is beyond all reasonable doubt. So you've really got to work hard to demonstrate it. But in a civil case, it's on the balance of probabilities. And on the balance of probabilities is much easier, much lower to demonstrate. And then the key piece in here, and it resonates with what we started right at the very beginning of the show about the CAT being still ongoing, is there's a reference to the CAT. And when I read it in my head, and as I said in the thread, my brain is a weird and wonderful place. Anybody who's old enough to remember Flash Gordon, where he shouts, "Gordon's alive, Cat's alive," that's how it comes out in my head, and that's drawn out in the statement. The newspaper reports suggesting that they're trying to keep it confidential, obviously, is a separate thing. And again, the club reinforced that as well. So that's where I had a little bit of cynicism in terms of the newspaper reporting, because it's almost they've drawn some inferences from the club statement to say that. And then the final bit, and again, it's referenced throughout, but they ask publicly for support from MPs, from the government, and from the fans. And public interest is really important in law. There's a public interest test. So if there's enough noise about it, then this could be an issue. And I know people will say, we tried this previously, we've done this already, but we've moved on from there and we're in a different place now, and we are actually on the precipice of this happening. So we're right on the edge. It's going to happen. It's going to happen soon. And the more this is in the media and being talked about, the more uncomfortable it is for the Premier League.
I was going to mention.
I thought that was a porn picture for a minute there. I was nearly freaking out. I was like, "Whoa, hang on, Chris, that's the last time you're on the buttons."
I uploaded that earlier.
A question then for you, George. Do you think if this was Man United, Liverpool, Spurs or Arsenal trying for a takeover with PIF, at the minute, we got the news flash from Sky Sports last night about the statement release, but there's very, very little of it hitting the news headlines. If that was any other club apart from Newcastle United, would it be a much bigger story with Sky Sports and everybody else? I would say it would be.
I think so. And I mean, I read something interesting today and it made us sort of pause and think about it. But I read that somebody being quite negative and saying it's just where Newcastle have to place themselves in terms of the importance of the Premier League. And I thought that's fair. We've been stagnating for a number of years, and we're sort of mid-table, mediocre, well, lower part of the table for a few years, and sort of scraping the barrel really, and then having a lucky run of results that ends you in a position which probably isn't truly reflective of performances throughout the season. But I think you're absolutely spot on. I think if it had been anybody in the top probably 10, then it would have been huge. I mean, so not just the top 6, but Crystal Palace, West Ham, Leicester. Well, Leicester are in the top 6 now. Everton, any of those types of clubs, then I think it would have been a huge story. Although I also read at the same time that Man City are going through arbitration with the Premier League as well, and that's not a massive story either. So I suppose you've got to kind of balance up what you know is happening and what's going on. But I do think if it had been one of those big ones, it would have been much more newsworthy. I mean, look at how much coverage they get over signing Jordan Sancho. And I mean, they've been trying to sign him for how long? It's not like it's news anymore. It's not really relevant. This is a much more interesting story that they could dissect and hypothesize on what's going to happen, but they don't. And that in itself is just a bit odd, in my view.
Yeah, no,
go on, Pete. Go on, Pete. No, I was going to say, because George a couple of times ago made a really good point that I wanted to kind of just to add on, and I think the point that you made, George, was absolutely spot on, and it's about public opinion, and I think that's what over the last year, this takeover and the arbitration, everything else in between, it's not had public opinion. And I think the biggest thing, and I don't know whether you agree, George, is that the biggest thing I took out from the statement yesterday was the fact that how quickly Sky Sports jumped on it. It wasn't long before they jumped on that particular statement. And that never happens with Sky Sports, particularly with our takeover. The only time they've jumped on it very, very quickly was when the consortium pulled out. They were instant. And they were instant last night. And I think that was a big point. And for all Sky Sports do with terms of news and all the rest of it, Sky Sports are the Premier League partners, and they have been supporters of the Premier League all throughout. And whatever the Premier League want them to put out there, they put out there. And that's why, I mean, I remember a few months ago, I called out Keith Downey on this, and I said, the level of media scrutiny on this particular issue with regards to the takeover has been absolutely minimal. And he said, well, we have reported on it. I'm like, yeah, well, you report on it for 30 seconds and then it disappears after a couple of hours and nobody hears properly of what it's about. And I think that's what Mike Ashley's doing. Mike Ashley's seen what's happened with the European Super League, and he's seen what public opinion has done for the European Super League. It's effectively ended it. So for the fact that he wants people, not just of Newcastle, but other fans of other clubs, to realise that actually this is not just to the benefit of Newcastle, it's to the benefit of the likes of West Ham, who are also looking for new owners. It's for the likes of, Crystal Palace or, Watford or whoever it is, Norwich City or, all of those teams that are outside the top 6. It's for the benefit of those guys because they've been shat on as well as we have. And it's about getting people aware of this situation because he wants to out the Premier League, 100%. He wants to out them for being corrupt and for stopping this deal from going through. And I honestly believe it could change. It could change the way football is governed in this country. This particular issue around our takeover, and it goes back to the point that I made around the CAT. I mean, the CAT is. It's a separate entity as far as I'm concerned because the arbitration is going to put us through. But the CAT is to really stick the knife in. Because if Newcastle win that CAT case, the Premier League have finished. They are finished. The amount of fines they'll get, the amount of money that they'll have to pay out, the amount of negative scrutiny that they'll get on the back of that. That's why the Premier League don't want it. And I honestly believe if that CAT case goes through, and it's been talked about that apparently they failed in their attempts to get it thrown out. If that CAT case goes through and they know they have to put all their dirty washing out on that line, they'll put it through because they won't want it.
Pete, would you say it's fair to say that the club and Mike Ashley have put the tanks on the lawn?
100%, and that building in the background is the Premier League.
Oh, we are.
And it's turning around. That tank there is just turning around. Make sure it's facing the right way, just to ensure that it's pointing at right where
let's hope it's not an own goal. All right. Well, we've had a good few viewers so far this evening. Chris has been. I have to say, we're coming up on our hour. Let's rapidly go around, and again, it's based on opinion and nothing other. For me, this takeover goes through at some point. I have no doubts. And if I'm proven wrong, I will come back on this show and go, do you know what, lads? I got it wrong. But I think it happens at some stage. Chris?
Yeah, I feel really confident about it. You know, George's threads, and I'm really looking forward to reading this evening's one as well, George, in more detail. So thank you for saying you'll share that later. I look forward to reading that. But yeah, I just think there's too much on our side, and I think that I mentioned it a few weeks ago, and George referred to it, and I know Liam has as well. You know, in terms of it being a game of poker, and I do feel like we've hit the river card. We've both got the Premier League have got their hands. Newcastle and Mike Ashley have got their hands, and I think they're just waiting for either one to fold. And from what I've heard and from what I've seen, I can't see Mike Ashley or Newcastle folding anytime soon. So I think either they go head to head or the Premier League folds. And in my opinion, I do believe that this deal goes through one way or the other. I just hope it's this year. For me, that's going to be the big thing. I kind of set myself a marker a few weeks back, and I said in my own head, right, as long as it's done by December. I think if it goes past December, I'll start feeling a bit down about it. But if it's done before December, and I've made it I've made it, you know, a nice and far away distance, then yeah, if we get to December, I'll be worried. But I think it goes through in the next few weeks, I believe.
I have
what about yourself, Pete?
I have to agree. I mean, I'm not giving it as big of a window as December as you. I think you're being really polite in that. I mean, we've been going long enough with this. It has to end now.
Oh yeah.
And you know, I don't think in terms of us knowing whether we're going to get taken over by this consortium. I don't see it. I don't see us getting past August without knowing either way. I think we're going to know by the end of August whether we're going to be owned by this consortium or not. I don't think it gets strung out any longer. I don't think the PIF are going to wait long enough, and I don't think the fans can take any more. You know, we as fans cannot take any more. It's been over a year as it is, but I honestly believe with the evidence that we've got and what we see, it can't not go through. I mean, Chris Hayes made a great point. He put it goes through. It has to go through. With what we've seen right now, it has to go through. And I only think a Montreal screw job, and if you're a wrestling fan, you know exactly what I mean by that. It'll be a Montreal screw job that will stop us from getting our takeover. It's just a case of what that date is and when it happens. That's the only things we don't know right now.
Yeah. George?
I have to agree with Pete there. I think end of August. I think if we're not under new ownership by the end of August, I think the comment that you made earlier as well about Ashley posting his keys through the doors is still true. I think he'll look for new buyers. I don't think we'll have him forever, but I think this comes to a conclusion end of August. And if you'll have us back on, I'll apologise if I'm wrong.
No, listen, I was just going to say through everything, the viewers tonight have been great. I'm sure we'll get a load of hits. And people will start following. If you're not following George, get onto Twitter. You can see his handle at the bottom there when we take the thing off, @Geordie2302. Give him a follow. He's a top lad, and we will definitely have him back on over a regular basis on Loaded Mag to give us updates. So yeah, we will do that. We thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, George.
Thanks, lads.
No bother for laying it out.
George,
what have you got going, Chris? I was just going to do next week. Go on.
I was going to say, hey George, just before you go dead quick, because I've been dying to ask you this, very quickly, what were your thoughts on that?
Good.
Like, obviously, we were all quite shocked. We weren't expecting to take it, but just very quickly, what were your thoughts on that? And who would you be after? Now he's not an option. Who would you go for?
I genuinely don't know. I got it. He went because I think he got the club. And that's the key bit for me. It's about somebody who'll get the club. And I think there's only a limited number of managers out there who get it. And you probably listen on hand. Marino gets it from Sir Bobby Robson. I think Chris Hughton would probably get it, but would you want to bring it under Chris Hughton? To be honest, I don't know. I was gutted, but would he? You can't. I'm not bothered. Not really. It is what it is. He's gone there. I wish him all the best.
Yep, agreed. I'm not bothered. He's gone.
Yeah.
Said my piece a couple of games back, a couple of shows back. For me, names and have people are talking about Conte, talking about Zidane. I would love to see and I know some people will scorn it, but I would love to see them go. Even though he's doing a good job up north, I'd love to see somebody like Gerrard or somebody like that, young manager, dead keen, everything else. Come on, Pete's got his finger up. Go on.
I feel like I'm back at school. I got my hand up because I tell you what, I've not been for it at all. But I know Chris wants this guy so much, and from what I listened to today, I'm starting to think that it could be a possibility if the takeover goes through. Now, I know Chris would love Jose Mourinho back at the club. Well, we'll say back at the club, but taking over Newcastle United as so Bobby Robson's number 2, blah, blah, blah. Now, what I listened to today is that Jose Mourinho is obviously manager of Roma. Apparently, he's not been given the funds that he was promised before he signed the deal at Roma. And they have literally, the owners have seized any of the signings that he wanted. So he's getting the Rui Patricio signing, and I think he's getting the Xhaka signing. But he wanted 3 or 4 of the signings because he wanted to revamp the squad. They've said no. Now, he's not happy at the moment. He's not happy at all. Now, I know he's not been there long, but I wouldn't be surprised if we got taken over in August and he thought, you know what, richest club in the world?
Yeah, back into it.
His old team, let's go over there and cancel his contract early. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm putting it out there. It could quite easily be a possibility.
Yeah, well, there you go. You heard it here first. Pete thinks Mourinho's coming back.
The reality of it is, though, anything's an improvement on Mr. Bruce, isn't it?
That's true, yeah.
Absolutely.
We'd be better than him. Right, coming up next week, Daz was not on the show tonight for those people who asked, but he's a pesky. He's like the one with the mask on in Scooby-Doo. He's a pesky little kid. Keeps telling us to wrap up. We are running over time about 7 minutes, and we will pack in. Coming up next week, coming up on Sunday, those that watch Loaded Football on Wednesday night will know that we've kind of knocked Loaded Football on the head. We're going to be doing different things. We are going to focus on Loaded Mag because that's where we see kind of our bread and butter. Richie is going to do a bit of music because we have been enjoying the music. So he is doing a Loaded Lounge with I forget the name of the group now. I forget now.
Is it Parade by any chance?
Parade, sorry, that's it. Yes, well done. Good job, someone's listening. So that's on Sunday night, I think around about 7:30. So you can join Richie for that. And then next Friday, 9th of July, on Loaded Mag, we will be joined by Lee from NUFC Fans TV. He is going to come on the show and we'll be chatting all things Newcastle again. God knows where we will be this day next week. Anything could have happened. If there is anything major, we'll do something where we can, even if it's an update. And if we can, we will grab George back on to give us updates. And that is really it for tonight.
I'll just say about Lee. He's a fantastic guy, great knowledge, obviously Newcastle Fans TV. He's a fan of the show as well. Really looking forward to coming on and talking Newcastle with us. So we're really looking forward to having him. And obviously, again, we talked about it when Paul came on from Tomb Review. We are expanding our sort of ourselves out and wide, and we're linking with those other podcasts and bringing everybody together, like we said last week. So that continues again next Friday. So really looking forward to that one. Yeah,
absolutely. And we will give a shout out to Paul off the Toon Review. He did one of his wrap up shows last night and did give us a really, really good mention. So fair play to him. Obviously, hit the likes and drop us a follow on Twitter at LoadedHQ1 and also sign up to the channel. You can see there, youtube.com/the/. Loaded HQ. Get on. We're going to keep trying to bring you this kind of content, and people like George who are out there in the Twitter sphere who are really putting some good stuff out there and making it easy. So I suppose to wrap up, I would say a big, massive well done between Pete and Chris, because they were both playing with the buttons tonight. Chris really his first one in charge on a loaded mag, which means we've now got 5 of us who are now trained on how to run this thing, which means some of us like me and Daz get a couple of nights off. So massive well done to you, Chris. Well done.
Cheers,
and Pete, the training sessions. Everybody who watched, smash the like. Thanks very much. And from me, and I'm sure the guys will say the same, George, listen, massive thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you, George.
And we'll definitely get you on again, mate. Absolutely.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks very much for the invite, lads.
No worries. Right, Chris, I'll let you wrap up, lad.
Yeah, as I say, Mark, really, thanks very much, mate. And George, once again, thank you very much for coming on. Really looking forward to next week's Loaded Mag now. But thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it. And take care, and we'll see you soon.
Take care, guys.